The cafeteria worker had strange things in her locker. Students had noticed boxes of sterile gloves, thick medical books, a plastic ID card, but nobody dared to ask why. Until that terrifying day came and everyone finally understood who she really was. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, hit that subscribe button and help keep these stories alive. Susan Martinez arrived at school every morning at exactly 6:45 a.m. She'd pull her brown hair back into a tight bun, slip on her white apron, and walk quietly to the small locker at the back of the cafeteria. She'd been working at Lincoln High School for 8 years, but she still seemed like a mystery to the students. 16-year-old Emma Chen was running late for math class. As she rushed down the hallway, she glanced through the cafeteria's side window. Susan was opening her locker, and Emma stopped. Inside weren't the usual cafeteria supplies. There were blue sterile gloves, thick medical textbooks, a plastic ID badge, and was that a stethoscope? Emma frowned. Why would a cafeteria worker have a stethoscope? At lunch that day, she told her friend Jake about it. Maybe she used to be a nurse, Jake said, biting into his pizza. Then why is she hiding it? And why does she always act so weird? Susan really did act weird. While the other staff members constantly chatted and joked around, she was always quiet. She was polite but distant with students, and her eyes, there was always a tiredness in her eyes, a weight. Emma couldn't let it go. The next day, she came to school earlier. Susan was at her locker again. This time, Emma looked more carefully. She spotted a small photograph taped to the back wall of the locker, people in white coats, what looked like a hospital corridor. "What are you doing there?" Emma jumped. Mr. Peterson, her math teacher, was walking down the hallway. "Nothing, Mr. Peterson. I was just, instead of wondering about cafeteria workers, focus on getting to class, Emma." But Emma couldn't focus anymore because Susan's secret was bothering her. Why did a cafeteria worker have medical supplies, and why was she hiding it? Weeks passed. Emma continued observing. She noticed patterns in Susan's behavior. When a student fell and scraped their knee, Susan moved faster than anyone else. When a teacher complained about a headache, Emma saw that knowing look in Susan's eyes. And then that incident happened. It was a Tuesday morning during second period. Tommy Rodriguez, a senior on the basketball team, was horsing around with his friends in the hallway. He was spinning on one foot, showing off, when suddenly he stopped. His face went pale. "Dude, I feel weird," he said, gripping the wall. His friends laughed. "You're just dizzy from spinning, man." But Tommy wasn't laughing. He was breathing hard, really hard. "No, something's wrong." His voice was getting quieter. Emma was walking to her locker when she heard the commotion. A small crowd was forming around Tommy. He was leaning against the wall, clutching his chest. I can't breathe right," Tommy gasped. That's when Emma saw her. Susan Martinez, walking quickly down the hallway with that determined look she'd seen before. But this time was different. This time, Susan wasn't just observing. "Everyone step back," Susan said firmly. Her voice had changed. It was authoritative, confident, nothing like the quiet cafeteria worker they all knew. "Ma'am, we should call the nurse," said Brad, Tommy's friend. "The school nurse is at a conference today," Susan replied, kneeling next to Tommy. "How long have you been feeling this way?" Tommy looked confused. Why was the lunch lady asking medical questions? Just now. My chest feels tight and I'm really dizzy." Susan placed 2 fingers on Tommy's wrist. She was checking his pulse, Emma realized. Not the way a concerned adult would, the way a medical professional would. "Tommy, I need you to sit down on the floor for me, okay?" Slowly. "Should we call 911?" asked another student. Susan was quiet for a moment, still holding Tommy's wrist, watching his breathing. Emma could see her thinking, calculating. "Not yet," Susan said. "Tommy, any family history of heart problems?" Now everyone was staring. How did Susan know to ask that? Tommy's eyes were getting scared. My dad had a heart attack when he was 45. Susan's expression changed. Emma saw something click in her eyes, a recognition, a decision being made. "Brad, I need you to go to the main office right now and tell them to call paramedics. Tell them we have a 17-year-old male with chest pain and family history of cardiac issues. Can you remember that?" Brad nodded and ran. Susan turned back to Tommy. "I'm going to help you lie down flat. Don't fight me." As she helped Tommy to the ground, Emma noticed something else. Susan's movements were practiced, precise. This wasn't someone who'd learned first aid from a pamphlet. This was someone who'd done this before, many times. "What's your name?" Tommy asked weakly. "Susan, I'm going to stay right here with you until help arrives, okay?" Emma watched as Susan continued taking Tommy's pulse, monitoring his breathing, asking quiet questions about his symptoms. The scared, uncertain teenager from moments before was calming down under Susan's care. That's when Emma saw it. As Susan reached into her apron pocket for something, a plastic ID badge fell out. It landed face up on the floor, and Emma could read it clearly. Dr. Susan Martinez, M.D. Emergency Medicine, St. Mary's Medical Center. Emma's mouth fell open. Doctor. Susan was a doctor. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. As they rushed down the hallway with their equipment, Susan stood up and stepped back. But Emma noticed she didn't leave. She stayed close, watching. "What have we got?" asked the lead paramedic, a woman with short gray hair. One of the students started to answer, but Susan stepped forward. 17-year-old male, sudden onset chest pain and shortness of breath, strong family history of MI. Pulse was 110 and regular when I checked. 5 minutes ago, no obvious distress, but he's anxious. The paramedic looked up sharply. "And you are?" Susan hesitated for just a moment. I work here at the school." The paramedic's eyes narrowed. She'd clearly noticed that Susan's assessment was too detailed, too professional for a school employee. As the paramedics worked on Tommy, taking his vitals and asking questions, Emma noticed Susan watching intently, not like a curious bystander, but like a professional evaluating their work. "Looks like anxiety attack triggered by overexertion," the lead paramedic announced after a few minutes. "We'll take him in for observation just to be safe given the family history." Susan nodded slightly, and Emma saw relief in her eyes. As they loaded Tommy onto a stretcher, he looked around for Susan. "Thank you," he called out. "You really helped me stay calm." Susan just nodded and stepped back into the crowd. But Emma wasn't letting this go. As soon as the paramedics left and the crowd dispersed, she approached Susan. "I saw your ID badge," Emma said quietly. Susan froze. For a moment she looked like she might deny it. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. "What ID badge?" she asked, but her voice lacked conviction. Emma pulled out her phone and showed Susan the photo she'd quickly taken. Dr. Susan Martinez, Emergency Medicine. Susan stared at the photo for a long moment. "You took a picture? Why are you working in our cafeteria if you're a doctor?" Susan looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "It's complicated." "I won't tell anyone," Emma said quickly. I've been wondering for weeks. The medical books, the stethoscope, the way you handled Tommy just now, you're really a doctor, aren't you?" Susan was quiet for so long that Emma thought she might walk away without answering. Finally, she spoke. "I was a doctor. For 15 years, emergency medicine at St. Mary's downtown." "Was?" I don't practice anymore. But why? What happened? Susan's eyes grew distant. Sometimes, Emma, being able to save lives isn't enough. Sometimes you lose someone you should have been able to save, and it breaks something inside you that doesn't heal. Emma felt a chill. You lost a patient. I lost my daughter. The words hung in the air between them. Emma didn't know what to say. She was 16, Susan continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Car accident. She was brought to my hospital, to my emergency room. I was the attending physician on duty that night. Emma's eyes widened. She began to understand. I did everything right, everything by the book. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes the injuries are too severe, the damage too extensive. Sometimes you have to watch your own child die on your table, and no amount of medical training prepares you for that. Tears were forming in Susan's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. After that, I couldn't be responsible for anyone else's life or death. Every patient reminded me of her. Every emergency reminded me that I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Emma felt tears in her own eyes now. So you became a cafeteria worker? I needed to be around kids, but in a safe way. A way where I could help without carrying the weight of life and death decisions. Serving lunch isn't complicated. No one dies if I mess up someone's sandwich order. But you still have all that medical knowledge, Susan nodded. You can't just forget 15 years of training. When I saw Tommy today, when I saw him struggling to breathe with chest pain and a family history of heart disease, I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing everything she'd learned. The things in your locker, you keep them just in case. Old habits, Susan said with a sad smile. And maybe part of me hoped I'd find the courage to use them again someday, to help people again. You did help today. You helped Tommy. Susan looked down at her hands. I diagnosed an anxiety attack and kept a scared kid calm. That's not exactly saving lives. It felt pretty life-saving to Tommy. Emma kept her promise. She didn't tell anyone about Susan's secret, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few days, she watched Susan with new eyes. She saw how Susan's gaze would linger on students who looked unwell. She noticed how Susan always positioned herself where she could see the entire cafeteria, like she was monitoring for emergencies. And she saw the sadness. Now that Emma knew the truth, Susan's quiet demeanor made perfect sense. She wasn't antisocial or unfriendly. She was carrying a grief so profound that it had changed the entire course of her life. On Friday, Emma was eating lunch when she overheard a conversation at the next table. Did you guys hear about Tommy Rodriguez? Asked Sarah, a junior. Yeah, he had some kind of panic attack or something, replied Marcus. My mom works at St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah continued. She said the paramedics were really impressed with how someone at the school handled the situation. Apparently, whoever helped Tommy gave them a perfect medical assessment. Emma's ears perked up. Probably the school nurse, Marcus said. That's the weird thing. The nurse wasn't even here that day. It was some other school employee. Emma glanced over at Susan, who was wiping down tables nearby. She wondered if Susan had heard the conversation. That afternoon, Emma decided to do something that might be risky. She approached Susan as she was closing up the cafeteria. Mrs. Martinez? Susan looked up. Yes, Emma? I've been thinking about what you told me, about your daughter. Susan's face tightened. Emma, I'd rather not. No, please, let me finish. I think she'd be proud of what you did for Tommy. Susan stopped what she was doing and really looked at Emma. You saved him from having a full panic attack. You kept him calm and made sure he got proper medical attention. That matters. Susan was quiet for a long moment. It's not the same as practicing medicine. Maybe not. But it's still using your gift to help people. And maybe that's enough for now. Susan's eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't fight them. Some days I forget that helping doesn't always mean performing surgery or shocking someone's heart back to life. Sometimes it just means being there when someone is scared." Emma nodded. "Your daughter would understand that." That weekend, Emma couldn't get Susan's story out of her head. She found herself researching grief, PTSD in medical professionals and parents who lose children. What she learned made her admire Susan even more. The fact that Susan had found a way to continue living, even if it meant stepping away from her career, showed incredible strength. Monday morning started like any other day. Susan arrived at 6:45 a.m., put on her apron, and began preparing for the breakfast service. Emma waved at her from the hallway, and Susan gave her a small smile in return. But at 10:30 a.m., everything changed. Emma was in chemistry class when they heard shouting from the hallway, then running footsteps. Mrs. Thompson, the chemistry teacher, went to the door to see what was happening. "Oh my God," she gasped. Through the small window in the classroom door, Emma could see students gathered around something, or someone, on the floor. Mrs. Thompson rushed out, and Emma followed despite the teacher's instructions to stay in class. In the hallway, Emma saw Mr. Davidson, the assistant principal, lying on the ground. He was conscious, but his face was gray, and he was clutching his chest. "Someone call 911, shouted Ms. Rodriguez, the Spanish teacher. "Already did," called back a student with his phone. Mr. Davidson was trying to sit up. I'm okay, he kept saying, but clearly he wasn't. "Sir, you need to stay still," Ms. Rodriguez said, but Emma could hear the uncertainty in her voice. None of the teachers knew what to do. That's when Emma saw her, Susan Martinez, walking quickly down the hallway. But as she got closer, Emma saw something different in her eyes. Not the hesitant sadness she'd carried for weeks, but determination. Susan knelt down next to Mr. Davidson without hesitation. "Mr. Davidson, I'm Susan from the cafeteria. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" "Chest, really tight, hard to breathe. Feels like someone's sitting on me." Emma watched as Susan placed her fingers on Mr. Davidson's wrist, just like she had with Tommy. But this time, her expression was more serious. "Any pain in your arm or jaw?" "My left arm. Yeah, it's been aching all morning." Emma saw Susan's face change. This wasn't a panic attack. "Has this happened before?" "No, never, but my chest has been feeling weird since yesterday." Susan looked up at the gathered teachers. "How long until the paramedics arrive?" "They said 5 minutes," someone called out. Susan nodded, then looked back at Mr. Davidson. "Sir, I need you to listen to me carefully. I believe you're having a heart attack." Gasps came from the crowd. Mr. Davidson's eyes widened. "I'm going to help you until the paramedics get here, okay? But I need you to stay as calm as possible." Emma watched in amazement as Susan took complete control of the situation. She had Mr. Davidson lie flat, elevated his legs using someone's backpack, and loosened his tie. She continuously monitored his pulse and breathing while asking him specific questions about his symptoms. "Does anyone have aspirin?" Susan asked. "I have some in my desk," said Mrs. Chen, the librarian. "Bring them, please. Mr. Davidson, are you allergic to aspirin?" "No." When Mrs. Chen returned with the aspirin, Susan helped Mr. Davidson take one. Emma realized she was watching someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The paramedics arrived and immediately began their assessment. Susan stepped back, but the lead paramedic, a different one from Tommy's incident, asked, "Are you the one who's been helping him?" "Yes." "Can you give me a rundown?" Emma listened as Susan gave a detailed, professional medical report. 58-year-old male, sudden onset severe chest pain with radiation to left arm, symptoms consistent with myocardial infarction. Conscious and alert, pulse irregular at approximately 95, respiration slightly labored. No allergies. I administered one 325 milligram aspirin tablet about 3 minutes ago. The paramedic looked at Susan with obvious respect. "Thank you. That's extremely helpful. What's your medical background?" Susan hesitated for just a moment. Then, in a clear voice, she said, "I'm an emergency medicine physician." Emma felt chills run down her spine. Susan had just revealed her secret to everyone. As the paramedics worked on Mr. Davidson, Preparing him for transport, the crowd of students and teachers looked at Susan with new eyes. Emma heard whispered questions. She's a doctor? Why is she working in the cafeteria? Did you know about this? Mr. Davidson, now with an oxygen mask over his face, reached out and grabbed Susan's hand. Even though he couldn't speak clearly, Emma could see the gratitude in his eyes. You're going to be fine, Susan told him. They're going to take excellent care of you at the hospital. As they loaded Mr. Davidson onto the stretcher, Emma saw Susan wiping tears from her eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of purpose, of remembering why she became a doctor in the first place. The news spread through Lincoln High School like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that Susan Martinez, the quiet cafeteria worker, was actually Dr. Susan Martinez, an emergency medicine physician who had just saved the assistant principal's life. Emma found Susan in the empty cafeteria after school, sitting at one of the tables with her head in her hands. "Are you okay?" Emma asked. Susan looked up. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "You know what's funny? For the first time in 3 years, I feel like myself again." "What happened when you were helping Mr. Davidson?" Susan was quiet for a moment. "I forgot to be afraid. When I saw him lying there, having a heart attack, all I could think about was helping him, not about what I'd lost, not about my failures, just about what needed to be done. And now? Now everyone knows who I really am." The cafeteria doors opened, and Principal Johnson walked in. Emma started to leave, but Susan asked her to stay. "Dr. Martinez," Principal Johnson said, sitting down across from them. "I just got off the phone with the hospital. Mr. Davidson is stable. The doctor said if you hadn't recognized that he was having a heart attack and given him that aspirin, the outcome could have been very different." Susan nodded quietly. "I also received some interesting calls this afternoon. Apparently word got out about what happened here, and St. Mary's Hospital has been calling. They want to know if you'd consider returning to emergency medicine." Emma held her breath. "I told them I'd pass along the message," Principal Johnson continued, "but I also want you to know that if you choose to stay here, we'd be honored to have you. Maybe not just as a cafeteria worker, though. We've been needing a school nurse." Susan laughed, and it was the first time Emma had heard her laugh genuinely. "I appreciate that, Mr. Johnson, I really do, but I think it might be time for me to go back to where I belong." Emma felt a mixture of happiness and sadness. She was proud of Susan, but she'd miss her. "There's just one thing," Susan continued. "I want to finish out the school year. These kids have become important to me, and I don't want to leave in the middle of everything." Principal Johnson smiled. "Of course. Take all the time you need." After he left, Emma and Susan sat in comfortable silence for a while. "Are you scared?" Emma finally asked. "Terrified," Susan admitted, "but also excited. For the first time in years, I feel like I might be able to help people again without being paralyzed by the fear of losing them." "What changed?" Susan looked at Emma thoughtfully. "You, partly. When you told me that my daughter would be proud of what I did for Tommy, it made me realize that I'd been so focused on the one life I couldn't save that I'd forgotten about all the lives I could still save." Emma felt tears in her eyes. "And today, when I was helping Mr. Davidson, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night my daughter died. I felt like a doctor again, not just someone with medical knowledge, but someone whose purpose is to heal." Emma was a senior now, and it was her last week at Lincoln High School. She was walking past the cafeteria when she saw a familiar figure. "Susan!" Dr. Susan Martinez turned around, and Emma barely recognized her. She looked confident, energetic, alive in a way Emma had never seen before. "Emma, I was hoping I'd see you before you graduated. I heard you got promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine at St. Mary's. That's amazing." Susan smiled. "It's been challenging, but good challenging. I feel like I'm finally using my skills the way they were meant to be used." "Do you ever miss the cafeteria?" "Sometimes. It was peaceful. But I realized that peace without purpose isn't really peace. It's just hiding." They walked together toward the parking lot. I have something for you, Susan said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a stethoscope, not the old one from her locker, but a new one. This was my daughter's. She was planning to become a doctor like me. Emma's eyes widened. I can't take this. Yes, you can. I know you're planning to major in pre-med at State. She would have wanted another young woman to carry on the tradition of healing. Emma accepted the stethoscope with trembling hands. Thank you for everything. You taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention to the people everyone else overlooks. Susan hugged Emma tightly. And you taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about finding the courage to face your pain and use it to help others. As Emma drove away from Lincoln High School for the last time, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw Susan walking to her car, confident, purposeful, ready to save lives again. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about the heroes who never fall down. Sometimes they're about the heroes who fall down, stay down for a while, and then find the strength to get back up and do what they were born to do. Dr. Susan Martinez had found her way back to herself, one emergency at a time. So I ask you, have you ever met someone who was hiding their true calling behind a simple job? Someone whose past held more than anyone realized? Share their story in the comments and tell us what city you're watching from today. Thank you for watching The Human Stories. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with others, because sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones serving your lunch, cleaning your floors, or working quietly in the background. They're not just employees. They're heroes waiting for the right moment to step back into the light.